Hey guys, welcome to Talking Strongman. Today's guest is the king of the under 105s currently, Mr. Nick Camby. You winner of America's Strongest Man under 105s. You won the Clash on the Coast, and you've just won the World's Strongest Man under 105s. It's been a good year for you.
It has, of course. Thank you for having me on, Laurence. I'm excited to be here, of course, talking to not only one of the competitors I grew up watching, but again, a fellow legend. So thank you for having me on, Mr. Laurence.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you. You've been, this year particularly, you've really sort of burst onto the scene, and I think you broken 2 world records this year.
Three world records.
Only 3 world records this year. It's been a good year, mate.
Yeah. So a lot. Of course, kind of rewind a little bit. So I think it's even just for myself. I have had some, again, this is with any strongman career, there's always been up and downs and disappointing years. 2018 might have been a little more disappointing year. So I think that really kind of kicked in into going into 2019. I knew 2019 kind of was almost like a rebuilding year, kind of like if, let's just say soccer teams or American football teams, when they lose their best players, they have to bring in the young players, start working on kind of like the basics, the blocking and tackling to get ramped up to be competitive in the future. That's kind of what I did in 2019. So I thought originally 2020 was going to be that year where I kind of break out and really get onto the scene. I only got one opportunity to compete, which was America's Strongest Man. I took second. I made some mistakes just because I wasn't quite competing all year round. And again, I kind of need to compete pretty regularly to not make those mistakes. But yeah, I was like, all right, if it was like I finished 2020 on a good note, so hopefully I can carry that momentum. And the stars aligned with the contest. Thank God there was no like COVID interruptions during these 5 contests that I did, including the record breakers. So I'm glad I was able to kind of execute. But it's more of a kind of like a steamrolling the other. So I got one clash. I'm like, oh, that's great, but can I roll this into the other contest? So I thought since I started winning the big show of the year, can I roll it in and turn into the best season ever for 105kg Americans? So that was my goal to start.
You did absolutely brilliantly. How did you find sort of competing so often? Is that something you're used to or not really?
Actually, so this year I did 5 competitions, and that includes 5 water cuts or five weight cuts. So that was quite difficult. But my average when I'm fully healthy is about 5 or 6 contests. Okay. But in those previous years, I've only done 2 water cuts in those years. I would jump into like amateur heavy competitions just to stay fresh and stay competitive. But for this year, yeah, that's the one thing, is that like water cutting was becoming second nature, and especially
let's talk through the water cuts, because I mean, there'll be a lot of people that compete in the lighter weight classes, and they'll find this side of things fascinating, and probably don't really appreciate how tough it is on the body. To do 1 water cut is one thing, but to do 5 back to back in what was a relatively short space of time, because all the contests were so condensed into the second half of the year, really. Talk us through what that's like, what it's like on the body, and how you go about kind of doing your water cut. What do you normally walk around at? What's your
sure? So at heaviest, I'll be before prep. I'll be 255. The goal 2 weeks out from the competition or 2 weeks out from the water cut, I like to be around 250. And then a week out, when I start the water loading, I like to be anywhere between 245 pounds or 248 pounds. So I like to cut. That's where I found my metrics in terms of, because I've cut from like the 250s. I've cut from like around like more closer to like 242, 240. So of course the lighter cuts are almost a little too easy. The heavier cuts are almost too strenuous, and I don't perform well come game day. So I think for each lifter and for myself, you got to find that range that's comfortable, where you're coming in at a bigger weight. You're coming at a bigger weight, but you're able to cut the weight and refuel and feel great like you did in water cut. So that's the challenge. So in terms of the actual water loading, everybody does it differently. Some individuals, like even our buddy Anthony Fermi, he likes to do more of like a bodybuilding water load. He starts like 2 weeks out, but I generally start doing about five days of water loading. So I start off with like so this might be tough in terms of going to gallons to liters, but I do 1.5 gallons the first day, 1.5 gallons the second day, which is almost similar to 6 liters, maybe a little less than 6 liters. And then I do 2 gallons, 2.5 gallons, and 3 gallons. And then in that time, you're adding in salt, you're cutting out carbs. And then the last day, you're no carbs, no salt. But you're really focusing on the water manipulation and pushing all that water out. And then I also use some items like a dandelion root or other kind of supplements that help extract the water come game day. And then, of course, I've learned those items over the years from kind of like other competitors. And I don't go too much the world of diuretics. I think that's something that's really tough on the body, that you can really pull the again, you can pull a lot of the water out and a lot of the weight out, but you're not going to perform optimal game day. So you got to find that right risk, or that right risk ratio of like what's a good being heavy, but being able to perform after the water cut. So that's kind of what I've been working on the last few years or so.
It's quite a science, really. I mean, you're looking at what is it, 20 pounds?
So it's generally about 20 pounds. Between 17 and 19 pounds has generally been at least the last 3.
Wow, that's absolutely crazy. I think of a heavyweight strongman losing that kind of weight is scary to them.
Yeah, like, of course, if they lose, a lot. Again, it always comes back, and again, it's just the water that you have. But yeah, if you lost 10, 20 pounds, or a heavyweight lost 10, 20 pounds before a contest, a lot of times they kind of shows on their on the competition day. But even if you bounce back and you're sometimes 92, 95% of where you were, let's just say full strength, that's still a decent cut as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to go back to get your story, but while we're sort of on this road, we've seen a lot of great under 105 lighter weight or middleweight as it is strongmen transition up to the heavyweights. Is that something you are looking to do yourself, or with the kind of popularity starting to grow in the lighter weight classes now, do you want to stay in the 231 pounds, isn't it?
Yes.
So do you look at staying and dominating that weight class, or have you got ambitions of going up and challenging, the big boys, if you like?
Of course, that's a great question, and I recently had a conversation with Colin about it. But the end result of course, after the discussion, you gave me some good insights, some good stories. But I think I really want to get what I want out of the 205 kilo class first before I move on to the heavyweights. I want to accomplish everything I want to accomplish ahead of time. So, of course, getting a big win this year, having a great season or great year this year was definitely a help. But I think now it's a little more of like added on and racking up those titles. So if I had to compare myself, of course I always compare myself against the competition, but I'm trying to compare myself in terms of those predecessors who came ahead of me. So I wouldn't even, like this year, I couldn't call myself the best 105 kilo ever, because there's definitely other 105 kilos that were a little more dominant through a longer time. So one example being Sean DeMarinis here in the United States. He was a 4-time America's Strongest Man. And he, of course, a great competitor. He hit in one contest for a 105 kilo athlete, he hit a 400-pound log and an 800-pound deadlift in the same contest, which is something that's never really been done before. So I still want to kind of chase that. And of course, he's a personal friend and mentor, so he's been a great help. But the other one is Mr. Ben Kelsey out of course, the UK. I believe he's a 3-time 105 kilo champion, world champion. I have 2 of his videos on YouTube of him winning in 2013 and 2015. I think I want to say he won 2014, but I'm having trouble finding that video. I think I've seen it before, but again, I'm having trouble finding that video. I think it might've been somewhere in the Scandinavia. But Ben Kelsey, of course, he was a great athlete, did some heavyweight, did some World's Strongest Man as well. So I would like to kind of chase those a little bit. And right now, and of course, to add to your question, there is a lot of opportunity in the 105 kilo class. I think there's going to be even more opportunity next year. I think all the shows, of course, now we only OSG, Official Strongman we were just at, but America's Strongest Man, Clash on the Coast, and then some other contests will be I think kind of propped up a little more than they were this year. But also there's a lot of excitement, not only from the 105 kilo athletes this year. I think they're going to be all roaring and working harder, taking more time to spend into strongman. But there's also some heavyweight some heavyweight competitors or former heavyweight competitors are coming down, could be at 105 kilo class. So some good, interesting ones. So like one being example of being Adam Dirks. He's planning on doing some 105 kilo competition. So he's a great athlete. So I'm excited to compete with him, but I'm not surprised that there's going to be 2 or 3 more notable heavyweights that are on that fringe of 105 kilos heavyweight that are going to be coming down and competing, since there is opportunity and there's a lot of excitement right now. So that's kind of what I foresee.
That's really cool. I think it's great that we're seeing these opportunities now for the different classes, for the women now, the men and the lighter weight classes. We're seeing the sport really grow. My eyes were open to it when I was at OSG this year, because obviously I follow the heavyweight side of the sport, and I do follow the different weight classes. I train a number of athletes in different classes, but when you see that many people that are performing so well, and you got people like Anthony Furman doing so much to try and push the sport and actually push the different classes, what's good about the lighter weight classes, I think they're a bit more achievable to the average person. You don't need to be, a 6'9" monster weighing 300 plus pounds to do strongman anymore. You can be a really good strongman and almost look normal day to day. I'm not saying you're a normal guy, but in terms of, you don't need that ridiculous frame that a lot of the heavyweight guys have, that it's almost unachievable to 99% of people out there to compete at world's strongest man level.
Absolutely. I think the weight class athletes are like of course, the efficiency masters, or some of the more, I would say, kind of talented individuals when it comes to like technique. Of course, a lot of times they can't rely on just gaining more size and eating more to get stronger. They have to really kind of focus on technique. And it's something that I've done for a while, just really focus on technique in order to get those gains rather than adding weight. So of course, sometimes you're already kind of maxed out at a certain weight, and like, of course I want bigger legs, but that's gonna push me out of the weight class or something along those rather. So you really got to figure out where you can be the kind of like the most efficient. So I think that's where you see a lot of not only talented individuals in the lightweight classes, but some of the more athletic, and then again some of the best technique that you'll see in kind of strongman. I would say I'm not trying to but it's also because I'm not saying that, of course, the heavyweights don't have technique. Of course, some of the deadlift technique of the heavyweights are the greatest, but there's when it comes to maybe some like pressing or other movements, there's a necessity for lightweight athletes to build the technique. Of course, like we use the example of Haffer Bjornsson, he was always the best presser, but he didn't necessarily have the best press technique, right? Because he had the technique just was great for him and what he needed to do, but he always won. But there's no necessity for him to develop into a formidable presser. I think he probably left a lot of pounds on the of course, on the table in terms of like what he could potentially do. He could have easily been a 500-pound presser, but in terms of like what he needed to do at the time that he put in the gym and what the result, he won every press regardless. So there's no really need for him. So compared to the need for weight class strongmen to really work on their press or something like that.
Absolutely. I when I'm doing seminars or coaching people, I always tell them not to look at the heavyweight guys because, as I mentioned, I mean, you take someone like an Eddie Hall or a Zadrunas, who are incredible pressers, but they are not limited to how much muscle and size they can put on. So they have these ridiculous shoulders and triceps that can press crazy weights. But someone like yourself, you have to rely on every single ounce of muscle in your body. So you learn to be explosive and use your whole body as effectively as possible. Whereas those guys can get away with having this ridiculous shoulder and tricep strength. And it's approaching things from like a different angle, I guess. And I love it. I love watching, not all of them, there's I've seen some under 105s that don't have particularly good technique, and likewise I've seen some heavyweights with great technique, but you do tend to see more of it. You'll maximize what you can get out of your body, because that's the goal. You don't have that option of just putting on a tremendous amount of size.
Yeah, when there's a want compared to like there's a need, if you put yourself in a need situation, your body will adapt to what it needs to of course accomplish a goal, or for instance do well in a competition. So I think it's really kind of like a necessity that the lightweights get put under compared to a heavyweight.
Absolutely. Well, I could talk to you about coaching and things like that for hours, but the reason I got you on, I wanted your story. And
sure.
If people want to learn from you, you've got your own YouTube page, your Instagram page, and you put some great content out there. So guys, make sure you go and follow Nick. But Nick, I want you to take me back to the start. Get all my guests on here. We want to know what got them into strongman. We want to know about the person behind the lifting. So what was it that got you into the gym in the first place and got you on this strongman journey?
I'll start talking, but if I get sidetracked, just reel me back in. And
no problem.
Help me out. So I probably started. I've always kind of worked out. I probably took working out really seriously probably when I was 15, 16, when I was training for, of course, American football and wrestling. That was, of course, my two sports in high school, and then I went on to continue wrestling in university or in college. For 4 years. I was a 197 pounder. And then my last year, I was a heavyweight wrestler. So I would be wrestling guys upwards of like 130 kilos when I was actually the same weight as I am now. So that's about anywhere between 110 to 115 kilos, or 240 to 250. So of course I always wrestled and I always lifted for wrestling. And one of the things where I had an advantage is like if I put a great off season together and get really strong, I can really kind of manhandle my competition. And then I had decent technique, but I would just really focus on maybe 4 or 5 moves that I was really efficient in. Of course, that's like either takedowns or moves off the bottom to get away and things along those lines. But again, I just realized there was a correlation between the time I put in the gym and then, of course, the result on the mat. So, of course, I was a great wrestler, but after wrestling was done, I had a void. So a year after, I was working at a gym and I got introduced to a bodybuilding coach. And I was thinking, like, well, bodybuilding is pretty cool. I've always thought bodybuilding. I want to give that a try. But within the first month of bodybuilding, as a cross training, he got us into do strongman events. So we did a strongman day, and he's like, "Oh, Nick, you did great. You should hop into your first contest." I'm like, "Oh, when's that?" He's like, "That's next week." So I hop into like my first contest. It was like a local show. And I competed. I think I won the press event, which is funny. And then I ended up doing okay on the rest of them. I took like 4th out of 6th, but I had a great time doing it. And I'm like, all right, let's see what would happen if I actually put a good. This is back in 2012. What happened if I put a good training prep together, and then I put a decent training prep. And that took like 4th out of 12. And I'm like, all right, it's 4th, like 2 4ths in a row, but this is pretty fun. So I think this is something that I want to give it a try. And then I competed like twice my first year, 3 times the next year. And of course I always kind of increased the number of competitions. And then weirdly enough, I got into like Olympic lifting during the same time I started, like right after I started strongman. So in 2013, I brought my first Olympic lifting shoes. I'm like, all right, I'm an Olympic lifter now. I got my shoes. I can do it. So I was doing that actually in conjunction, like Olympic lifting and strongman, up to 2015. I had the benefit of like local Russian weightlifting coaches in the area. So I would go to them for a technique. So I learned kind of like properly how like not only like kind of clean, but of course to push, press, and jerk.
That has to be really valuable, having that knowledge on your doorstep.
Absolutely. And I would say the Russian technique is, of course, much more significant, much more refined than compared to like American technique. So it was a great benefit. But after a while, I realized, of course, I was spending a lot of time on snatching. And when I won my pro card in 2015, I actually did an Olympic meet right the week after. I won that. And then I did, of course, another kind of contest, a strongman contest. I won that. So I had like a nice little week, but I realized that doing all the snatch work, doing all that technique work wasn't really carrying on to strongman. So I thought, I'm like, all right, I might have to, like, I was more of an Olympic lifting fan rather than a real Olympic lifter. So I was doing all these strongman competition and doing Olympic lifting at the same time. So I cut out the Olympic lifting, just carried on I cut out the snatching. I still did like a lot of the power cleans, muscle cleans, push press, push jerk. And then I carried that into my strongman training. And of course that made a really big difference. So of course, pressing was my first thing that I was really pretty decent at, or when I would kind of like get the most points. But I think I underperformed on pressing up to I underperformed on pressing until this year. I always have big training numbers, but I couldn't just quite get the right, because I was really good at maxes. It wasn't quite quite great at doing reps. So again, that's something that I had to work on for many, many of years. But now getting back. So 2012, I started a gym called Total Performance Sports. So of course, that's where I met Eric Dawson. So Eric Dawson was getting coached by Murph at the time. So Murph was Eric Dawson's first coach. And then other great strongmen actually have come through that gym as well. So previous to that, like Sven Carlson used to go and visit Murph, and of course, right north of Boston, and he would train there. So, so Murph has had a great influence in the strongman area. Kevin Nee, you've had Kevin Nee on here. So Kevin Nee, of course, from northern Massachusetts. I think he's out in Arizona now, but so of course he would be the ref at a lot of my matches or a lot of the competitions early on. So I learned from him, but of course he was a great guy. And then of course when I saw him on MTV when I was growing up, and then I got to see him in person because he would pop into the gym every so often. And of course, he was the kind of like the young stud, being a world's strongest man at 21 years old. So I'm like, oh man, it's Kevin Nee. And of course, I'll be able to talk to him about kind of his experience. But I think when I started getting decent, he was kind of on the ladder of his kind of career. And unfortunately, I think I saw his last strongman workout ever, where he was like, he was coming back, he was feeling great. He just did like a very bicep heavy day and tore his bicep on the last thing. And it was like his fourth time. He knew it immediately. So I did see that, and that had a low impact. He's someone that has poured so much hours and time and money into the sport, and just kind of have that disappointing in terms of like, of course, it's not his body failing him, but just kind of that constant bicep tears. But that also made me very kind of focused, and even came towards back for wrestling having a special focus in terms of recovery and injury prevention. I don't like to use the word hate a lot, but I hate being injured. I learned that back when I was 19, 20 years old, when I tore my meniscus. I was like, I really don't like not being on the mat, not being able to perform. So I think I've always took a special note to being staying as heavily injury free as possible. So I think that what I do probably best the most when we talk about strongman is knock on wood, is staying injury free. So I think of course I always hear about people tearing biceps and triceps and quad muscles and stuff like that. I think to this point I've only had one strongman related surgery, and that's a rescope of my knee. So since my 9-year career, I've been injury free. So for the most part. So here, going back to the story. So of course, the decent origin. So 2015, I won my pro card. So I was mentioned, I won like a slew of competitions, and then I didn't have my first. And then I went 6 years without winning a competition until Clash on the Coast. So literally, I went on a drought where I would do amateur heavy shows. I would, of course, I went to Belfast to compete at Worlds. I went to Hungary to compete in a world team competition. So I would travel. I was traveling the world and traveling the United States, but I was just gaining all the experience. But I didn't I would get a lot of seconds and thirds, and then maybe like top fives, but I wasn't winning. And I think that kind of drove me into the kind of this year as well. Is that I got to the point where I did all these competitions, and then all the guys that I compete against and that used to beat me kind of, especially prior to the pandemic, are just kind of fizzled out because of injury and health, and then career reasons. And then after the pandemic, competing against like the newer 105 scenes, some guys kind of carried over, like my friend Johnny Wasisco and James Deffenbach, of course, two great 105 kilo competitors. But for the most part, I got to the point where all the guys I've competed against, I was the most experienced individuals. I've had the most situations where I've done the most log, the most yoke, most stone. So that's something that I really kind of, I think, use my advantage, that I've seen the most situations and of course I've competed the most. Even though I don't think I've competed that much, especially after hearing you guys talk about Big Z and the number of competitions he did, and Mariusz Pudzianowski. I've done 38 competitions since 2012, which I think is a decent amount for 105 kilo, but not in the grand spec. So I would like to kind of get that.
It's a good, sensible kind of amount. You've gained good experience, but it's not too much as well. You can go either way. Some people probably don't compete enough. Some people will compete too much. I used to compete too much. Early on in my career, I do way too many shows. And then as my career went on, I try and be a bit more selective and give myself that training cycle between shows to sort of peak, rather than that's one of the hard things I've seen. I don't know if you noticed it this year, and I think I spoke to you briefly at OSG about it. when you get invited to the like Giants live shows, or you get those invites to those big shows, there's almost this pressure that you've got to keep turning up to every single one. And often when guys do that, you actually see a bit of a decline in them. They do really well on that first one, and then it's a little bit worse and a little bit worse because there's just no time to train, and they're just trying to maintain that level. You seem like you got your head screwed on. You're focused on your goals, and you're looking at being selective about which shows that you do.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think I almost did all the shows I could do. And then at least the big level shows, I would think I would go out of my way to do other shows. But in the last 2 months, including OSG, let's say like 9-10 weeks, I did three shows, of course, one being a record breaker, America's Strongest Man, World's Strongest Man. By the World's Strongest Man, I was a little overtrained. I think that was probably where I was most susceptible because I've been training all year. I didn't have that nice 12-week prep going into it. So I was a little hurting. I think I kind of showed on the last day that I just didn't have the stamina I normally do going the third day. So I just held on to whatever I had left to squeeze that out. But I was looking at some of the training. I lost a lot of points on like the sandbag throws at OSG. But if I just got that fourth bag over, that could have got me like 2 or 3 extra points, would have been a nice cushion. But I guess I wanted to make things interesting. So I wanted that extra pressure going into it.
You can't win everything too easy, Nick. You know, you need some opposition to make it look, you've got to work a little.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's a lot of great athletes out there that are going to be, you're the name now to beat in the under 105. So you're going to be, on the chopping board. Everyone's going to be chasing you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I was talking to a friend this year. I think especially next year, this year was great and the competition was great, but it's going to be another level next year because now, of course, COVID, there was only like one or few competitions. This year, there was abundance of competition. There's plenty of data of people of where like, oh, these are the numbers that I need to hit in order to be on this level. So everybody knows what they need to hit now. So I pretty much I could pretty much do the same things and do well next year. But I think this year, the main focus is more of like a reinvention because I know people are going to be gunning. They're going to be bringing their best stuff into every competition. So if I want to continue being here, I got to really kind of reinvent myself and maybe kind of do like a Camby 3.0, 4.0 by now. So I think that's kind of my focus to the off season. But I was, of course, just to add a point, you were talking about just being, of course, can't make the wins too easy, but like generally like those close wins or close competitions, I've been on that losing side more often than not. Right. So like I was saying before, between 2015 and 2021 before Clash, I pretty much lost those situations earlier, but I've been in that so many times that I think it's, of course, again, mental having that mental strain and mental experience in a competition is, I think that's why people need to compete more. I always push that the best competitors are the ones that are competing more. So it is. So even like the Giants Live, of course, you want to be on that main stage and of course in that circus. So especially for those heavyweights, but like, of course, I could see guys like, for instance, like with Trey was doing a lot of as many shows as he can. And then after he's like, all right, I got those shows. Let me do a rebuild. And then whenever they do that rebuild, they have that experience from competing and then they really do well. So I think that's kind of like the process a little bit and something that I had to kind of realize and learn, but no one could really tell me. I just had to go out there and experience and have my own faults and have my own mistakes and be able to correct those.
Well, you've done amazingly well. 2012, for me, doesn't even seem. I think of 2012 is not that long ago. I guess it is now.
Yeah, 9 years now, right?
Yeah, back into those kind of years, I would do. Well, at one point I did 7 competitions in 6 weeks, and that was stupid. But a lot of like JF Karan, Zadrunas, Marius. That's the kind of stuff we used to do back then. I never recommend it to anyone, and if I could do things differently, that's one of the things I would do differently. But it's good to hear talking to people like yourself and a lot more of the newer guys, if you like. They're a lot more screwed on with focusing on bigger shows, focusing on events that can firstly grow the sport, but also help them grow their own profile. And that's what we're starting to see. I think Clash on the Coast was a real big step up for the lighter weight or the middleweight strongman this year. How do you see that going in the future?
Just future wise, I think it's so the production is going to be added. I think right now it's very a known entity, given that, of course, all the production. But now knock on wood, hopefully all the policies stay the same, that we're going to get some more international competitor. Technically, it was an international show because we have one Canadian, Isaac Mays. So that was exciting. So it was more of like a North American championship. But I think next year, hopefully we'll get a slew of international competitors going through the international qualifiers. So of course, if some of the international 105s are listening, of course you can head over to Clash on the Coast and see the qualifiers are coming out probably in the next week or so. Or
yeah, they're doing qualifiers this time.
I think it might start Friday. So
excellent. Well, if you're up and coming under 105, make sure you check that out, because Clash on the Coast is kind of raising the level when it comes to lighter weight strongman at the moment.
But it's also a good, even if you don't make the Clash on the Coast, is also a good test to see where you sit among other competitors in terms of training numbers. So even if it's if you're a 1 or 2 year guy and you just want to gauge where you're at, I think it's also a pretty good idea. But of course, just remember, it's for the qualifiers for the international folks, not for you Americans. So,
so talking to numbers, you broke 3 world records. You corrected me on it earlier this year. Talk to us about the world records. I mean, you were just saying that you loved the overhead, but you didn't actually perform as well as you like to, or you could say, compared to your training numbers. This year, though, it all came together, and you've been smashing PB after PB and world record after world record. Talk to us about that.
Sure. So in terms of the 3 world records, the axle is probably something that I've always been probably where I've been more naturally good at. I think just from the kind of Olympic lifting background, I kind of developed my own kind of technique around it, where I do some extra bumps when it comes to continental clean to get it into my rack position. But also kind of a power clean, continental clean, because I try to dip under the catch, and that works for not only the fixed bars, but unfixed axle bars. So with the axle, so that's something that it's always in my back pocket. I just never had the opportunity to do a max. Last time I did a max was 2015, and then I went on 6 years not being able to perform my best max. So when it came about, I really needed to smash it, because I didn't want another 6 years before I can try to hit that again. And that was the question over at Clash too, was I've been competing for about 2 days. We've been competing for 2 days. It's technically the 7th event. I already had the event win, but do I go for the extra thing? But like, how many times do I get an opportunity to not only hit a world record, but hit it on national TV? So that was pretty cool. So I ended up hitting 417. I wanted to do 190. Just so, like, again, it would resonate with the international folks. But of course, the weights came out to 417, which was fine. But I think that's the one record that I think I could keep pushing more, because again, I think that's something I always had in the back pocket.
You got to be thinking 200 kilos then, long term.
Yeah, I think 430 is there. And if I put a good training session, 200 kilos would work. And then maybe if I had the right equipment around me too, and depends on the prep. But again, I'm still pretty satisfied with that number at the end of the day. And then of course there's the log, and I did the log in the Waco Super Series for Clash on the Coast. So of course they had the record competition around, and then after they were done, I hopped on there. And the log, of course, being the staple of strongman overhead movements. So of course that's pretty important. But I wasn't as naturally good at the log, so I really had to work on that. So the record was 412, and my previous competition best was 370. So I really had to work at it, and I had about 9 weeks to train it, and I was logging twice a week. And I just thought to myself, if I hit each step of the way and hit those numbers, and hit what I want to do in training, I should be able to give it a go. So previously, Rob Kearney held that record. But before he hit 410, so that was the previous record, he hit 400 and also 425 in competition. So 425 on the Arnold amateur stage in 2015. And then I think early in the year, he hit 400 to break. And so when he hit 410, he broke his original record. So he already hit 400 in competition twice, something I've never done. So I'm like, am I a little too early to be hit a world record? So I really had to work at this to get it. And come competitions time, I did 2 attempts before the world record. So of course, 3 attempts going into it. I did 373, which was pretty easy, but ended up kind of hurting my knee a little bit. So it kind of hurt to do on the bend. So of course you bend, and at the bottom of the bend, it felt me. I don't know if it was my patella or my meniscus or something, but it wasn't great. So I put on some like my version of Ukrainian icy hot cream, which is I get from one of my Ukrainian friends, and I rubbed that on, and of course it burned, but I didn't really feel it. I ended up missing 400 pounds or 182 kilos in my second attempt. And that was kind of I rushed it, but it felt good enough. And I didn't come there to hit 400. I went there to hit 412 or more. So I thought I'd just bump it. But I remember just talking to Anthony behind that or behind the stage right before the temp is like, it's now or never. Like I might not get every chance. And I thought my knee was gonna give out. So like, but I had enough just for one attempt. So I'm like, I gotta go. So, but I knew from the previous attempt, I really need to get my feet out there and really spread the floor. So when I was able to do that, I think that was kind of my keys to success, was to really kind of break the separation across my chest and then push myself under, get the feet out. And once I hit it, I think I kind of blacked out. I was ecstatic. I didn't even think. And then towards the end of the video, I think I kind of came back to, didn't realize I hit it. I was like, there's no way I was going to hit it. So that was great. And then the block, if you're good at the block, if you're good at log, I think you're good at the block. So that came natural. So I ended up just hitting that right after the log, but I didn't just want to just do one record when I went to Waco. I wanted to do two. So that's how it came about.
So what's the goals next year then? You broke 3 records this year. You've won I think you've won every show you've done this year, haven't you?
I took third. I went, so 4 weeks after Clash, I went to Murmansk, Russia to compete in the Strongman World Cup. Okay. So Zadrunas was the head ref. Kaklaev was you have 2 Mishas. Yeah, it was Kaklaev. So Kaklaev was the announcer. So it was a 1-day event. So they had Axel again. But Zadrunas is a little more strict on the touching the belt. But I only actually needed my opener to win. But I ended up taking third on that contest.
It's been the belt clean has been a big thing this year, hasn't it? Like, yeah. Under 105s, it's never been an issue to use the belt, has it?
It's depend on the federation. But most Americans competitions they don't mind. Zadrunas, I think it's funny. Of course, some of the Russian promoters were giving me a hard time, like before coming, and they were even commenting on the competitions where it's allowed to belt clean or allowed to touch your belt. Because I really just use it to kind of change my hands.
I don't even have a problem with heavyweights doing a belt clean. I think just get it from the floor to overhead, any means necessary. It's strongman. We let certain things go in other lifts. I don't really see the issue with it.
Yeah, but in the end run, I think so that was the rules. But Zadrunas was like, you can't really rest it. But I still did the extra bump, so it doesn't even clear. I didn't want to question, but I ended up winning. I ended up winning on just my opener, which is nice. But I don't think it'd be really tough. I think at that point, because it was a month out after Clash, because I had to kind of relearn that extra bump or that non-belt clean. So I don't think I would have had a record in me, but I think I would have had enough to kind of win the event. But I messed up on the car squat, which was a weird kind of car squat. There was like no heights to it, and the bar wasn't fixed into there, and so pretty much you would squat and all the weight would come off your back, and then when you stand up again, it was all right. And I also didn't really train it. Like in hindsight, I should train it differently, but like again, that's a mistake that you make. And so I ended up taking third in that competition. But just there was a lot of, I think, more that went into those circumstances in terms of like traveling and was able to kind of refuel. But like I was going there for the experience. Being an international competitor is just is another skill that you want to add to. So I think the next time
something that takes experience. You got to learn it. Just because you can do something in the gym and you do it in your own conditions, it's much easier than when you've got to travel. It's something that, yeah, definitely. The more you do it, it becomes a little easier.
So I think next time, I think I'll probably get invite again to Russia next year. So I think this time I'm going to be coming for gold. So I think I'll have a better idea because I made some mistakes, but but again, it was a great experience. Of course, I'd never been to the Arctic Circle, and that's where we end up competing. So, and then of course, the Russian people were not only fanatics of the sport, but of course, asked to take a bunch of pictures and all. So it was great being up there, and of course, they treat us very well. Ate some great food, a lot of seafood, a lot of like elk, deer, moose. So that was a lot of fun.
Sounds like a good trip. So it's been a great year. You know, no one can deny that. Big major titles won, world records broken. What's the plan 2022?
22. So right now, that's what's set right now. It's probably Clash on the Coast. So that'll be April 22nd. So the events are still waiting to be announced, but I know what I need to work on just in general in my off-season prep. So I'm working on some items there. I imagine that Russia trip might happen again, so that might be in June. And I'll probably do all the same shows. So of course, America's Strongest Man, and then potentially official Strongman games as well. So I'll have at least those 4 lined up, and then I probably won't do any more record breakers unless they're in a competition. I want to get my deadlift up. I want to I would like to kind of focus on maybe establishing a American record when it comes to raw deadlifting. So without the suit, and then eventually go for the suited record, maybe a few years down the line. I don't think I'm ready for that yet. Like, of course, and that's something that's really well contested. Of course, your boy Matthew McKeegan held it, and he recently lost it the other day to Blake Lawrence of South
Africa.
Yeah.
Did 415 kilos, I think.
So McKeegan took it from him originally. So he just took it back. And I competed with Blake back in 2017 OSG at World. So he's no slouch when it comes to
hopefully we see him contesting at OSG next year then as well.
Exactly. So I was talking to another friend, Yuri Katalchek of the Czech Republic. He's a great competitor, but he might be hosting a couple shows next year too. So I'll have at least those 4 shows that I did this year. Of course, planning on next year, but we'll see what other comes about. I don't know if another organization might come to the table and have a big one-off contest. I think the Arnolds are still. So I'm still holding out for them to maybe potentially ever have like a 105kg pro show and be on one of those.
That would be cool.
Yeah, so I'm still holding out for that. But those are probably the plan. Those for right now. And then, but in terms of like the actual heavyweight shows, I could see that maybe again, knock on wood, I gotta stay healthy and I gotta stay injury free. But I wouldn't be opposed maybe after 2022 maybe jumping in. But I'm not sure if I want to commit and go through the open cycle. I'll be happy to take an invitation, but I think I could be potentially a 105kg lifer that occasionally jumps into a heavyweight competition.
I think that's a good way to do it. And I think in terms of helping the under 105s grow, we need guys like yourself, good characters and people that are passionate about making that side of things grow as well, because it's a tough thing. We all want to be the big dog, the number one in the world, but we need characters. We need the standard to improve in these different weight classes. And that's what, we're seeing constant improvement in every single area of strongman right now. The women, the men, the different weight classes, every single year it gets better. We want the best people from all over the world competing against each other. That would be awesome to see. And I think you got, yourself, Anthony, and, many others are one of the main reasons that the popularity is growing. So keep doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you. But I also had the benefit of watching guys like Anthony. Of course, I was mentioned to like my mentor, Sean, and other 105 kilos that they make the step to, let's just use Anthony on the case. So he made that step, and then, of course, he started to be more injury prone and got a few injuries because of it. So it's, of course, going from here, like right now, I kind of really figured out what the algorithm is to be a good 105 kilo. So, like, of course, you have so many inputs and outputs and stuff like that.
The fact is that, you look at fighting, you've got a wrestling background. Not everyone can be a heavyweight. Some people are better off suited at a certain body weight. And it's the same in strongman and powerlifting and Olympic lifting. You've got to find the right weight class for you. And I think, the fact that we've got these different options now for people to compete in is a good thing. It's people probably criticize me when I say this, but you could come and do a few heavyweight strongman shows. You could do well. But I guarantee if you tried to be a full-time heavyweight strongman, your career would shorten this much.
Absolutely. And that's, you just take the additional risk, right? So of course the heavier weights, again, you're eating all that food, you potentially develop a sleep apnea, all these different items that come with excessive weight gain. So again, like, am I ready for that risk? And what's the risk reward, right? Having like a shorter career. Like, again, I think it's, when I was talking to Mr. Bryce, he was talking about like, what's the risk reward, right? It's like, like, what do you love? Like, I love like strongman. I love 105 kilo strongman. I also love competing in the heavyweights, but do I love it as much as 105 kilo? I'm not quite sure. So I think you just really said focus on what's important for you right now. And again, I
think it's a great thing. I think a lot of people watching and kind of that look up to you in the under 105s and under 90s, 80s, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. It's good to see that kind of answer sometimes. It's great to sit there and say, yes, you want to be the world's strongest man. But I think you're showing people that you can be elite level, reasonably fit and healthy, and still, win world titles. It's a good thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it's fun to have abs, but I only have it. To be fair, I only have abs during competition time. Right now, I did probably the last 2 weeks. I probably did a year's worth of eating. Just given that I did like 3 weight cuts in a row. So of course, I've been a little lazy. I've only done one serious workout. The rest has been kind of easy workouts. But for the most part, it's just, it's just something I, of course, want to stick to. And and I think there's a lot of kind of great guys, again, that I enjoy kind of competing with. And of course, I have a lot, again, you look forward to kind of competing with your friends. I know, of course, when you get together, World's Strongest Man or at the Arnold's or on ultimate shows, again, you're going to compete with all your friends, but going to if I went to like heavyweight and went to a different country, I'm pretty much kind of going by myself, right? Again, you always make friends. Everybody's a very fair community, but also there's the community aspect, and it's good to see everybody on yearly shows. And even for instance, like Anthony has been at most of my shows, even if they're not Clash shows, he was still there. So it's always kind of great to compete in that sense.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure to chat to you. If anyone wants to find out more about you, where can they find you?
Sure. So, and then you mentioned a few, but Camby Dude across the social media. So Camby Dude on Instagram, Camby Dude on YouTube. I'm also Camby Dude Camby on TikTok. So I have, those are probably my 3 main strongman platforms. And then of course, any coaching material you can find on Strengthly, which I have my videos, instructional videos, which I'll be coming out with more. And then I have one program on there. I'm coming out with 2 more programs. So that's my off-season. Those are my off-season goals for Strengthly.
There we go, guys. Make sure you go and check those out. Nick, have an amazing 2022. I hope you have a good Christmas and New Year. And I look forward to seeing you in at Clash on the Coast 2022.
Yes,
April. See you there to defend your title.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Laurence, for having me on. Of course, it's a pleasure.
Worries. Guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Nicolas Cambi, everyone. Take it easy. While you're here, guys, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of my awesome strength content.